School. Statistically, most people watching have been to one before. I know there's probably a lot of unschoolers watching this video, but even most of them went to school at one point in their lives. And this is because for almost everyone in the developed world, and hopefully a lot of people outside of it, school completely dominates the first 2 decades of your life. Even after you grow up, your kids will also likely go to school. School plays such a big role in our lives, yet some people have begun practicing the very radical idea of not going. And I'm not even talking about homeschoolers. I'm talking about unschoolers. Unschooling is a controversial educational philosophy developed in the 1970s by former teacher John Holt. The concept of unschooling is that the child does not go to school and gets control over their own education, deciding how, when, and what they learn, pursuing their passions rather than the school curriculum. And as it turns out, unschooling is controversial for a reason. If you read accounts of people who have been unschooled themselves, you'll find them very polarised. I've read dozens of accounts of unschooling in my life, and about 2 people have had an okay experience being unschooled. Everybody else said it either ruined their lives or massively improved it. It's very rare to find an issue so bipolar as this one, as most things aren't as polarised as the media makes it out to be, but this genuinely does seem to be a truly polarised issue. So unschooling has shown potential to be both an enormous success and a disastrous failure. This raises an obvious question: what's the difference? What is the common denominator shared by the few positive accounts of unschooling that differentiates them from the many negative accounts of unschooling? The purpose of this video then is to find out how to do unschooling correctly. If you're considering unschooling your child, how do you ensure it doesn't go wrong? And how do you guarantee the good ending? I consider it crucial to answer this question as soon as possible to protect the youth of our planet. We'll find out if a successful unschooling childhood is because of something to do with the parent, the child, or another factor, or if it's even possible to guarantee a successful attempt at unschooling. Maybe it is just luck and most kids can't be unschooled. We're going to find out. And to do so, I shall be reading you accounts of unschooling, and then analyse them to find out how to ensure unschooling goes well. So, here's the plan for this video: explain the unschooling spectrum to you, and then I shall read you some accounts, both negative and positive, of unschooling. And finally, I shall include a segment at the end where I talk about the accounts and work out how to do it correctly. The homeschooling spectrum is a way of measuring how much parental involvement there was in the homeschooling process. On one side we have the most extreme form of unschooling, radical unschooling, in which the parent provides absolutely no educational help to the child whatsoever, even if the child begs for it. They are on their own to educate themselves. Then we have unschooling, in which the parent still takes an active role in the child's education, helping the child whenever they ask for help, and talking to them about whatever they are learning currently. Then we have relaxed homeschooling, in which the parent has some baseline academic targets the student is expected to achieve. Finally, we have homeschooling, in which the parent tutors the child in traditional subjects such as maths, and educates them in a similar way that a normal teacher would. After I read an account in this video, I will mark that account on the homeschooling spectrum to get an idea of which version works best. So, for example, if the third account is a negative account that looks a lot like relaxed homeschooling, we shall put a red counter, red for negativity, with a 3 in it, in the relaxed homeschooling section. That way, at the end of it, we shall see which version of unschooling or homeschooling has the most negative accounts, and which has the most positive accounts. I will read you the responses to my form, plus several other accounts I found on the internet. So we have a 46-year-old with 7 years of formal education. They don't specify what those 7 years were, so we don't know if he went to primary school for 7 years or did like a 7-year PhD in university or something. Either way, this is a positive account, okay? They are glad that they were unschooled. And what does unschooling mean to you? Education without a formal curriculum or routines, relying on child-guided interests, books not intended for school use, and community/museum/independent activities. What does an average day look like when unschooling? Reading books, doing art projects, doing science projects, visiting museums and nature areas. How did you/your child learn to read? And how did you/your child learn other key life skills while unschooling? Through reading with my parents and practicing with easy reading books. Was unschooling an overall success? Yes. What should have been done differently if you had to do it again? We should have done more math workbooks. For those of you glad you unschooled, what advice would you give to those considering unschooling? Unschooling is more work, not less. You should expect to spend hours every day working with your child on their learning. Anything else to add? I'm curious what you intended to learn from this open-ended survey. You don't ask a lot of questions I would expect, like measurable outcomes. Either way, I'd personally put this in regular unschooling, because it definitely isn't radical unschooling, the parents did help, but considering it was child-guided interests, it seems like it probably wasn't relaxed homeschooling or homeschooling either. What is your age? 49. How much formal education have you had? K9, several years of Sudbury Valley schooling, and college. Which of the following categories would you put yourself into? An adult who was unschooled as a child and is glad they were. An adult who was unschooled as a child and wishes they weren't. What does unschooling mean to you? It means having been freed from being under the thumb of the government's idea of what schooling needs to be, at the potential expense of being an outsider from general society. What does an average day look like when unschooling? I smoked a lot of cigarettes while listening to music and had off-campus sex during school hours regularly. How did you/your child learn to read? And how did you/your child learn other key life skills while unschooling? Parents taught me how to read, as did public school. Was unschooling an overall success? Not really. It was a fun time though. What should have been done differently if you had to do it again? There has to be some benchmarks for learning. Maybe not what the state decrees, but something. I should bring up now that when he says he was a Sudbury Valley School student, what he means is Sudbury Valley School is basically unschooling at school, okay? It's a school where kids go to and basically they do whatever they want, okay? Or at least they vote on what to do with the teachers, so this person isn't unschooling in like the what you think of as unschooling. It's a kind of different kind of unschooling. Either way, for those of you glad you unschooled, what advice would you give to those considering unschooling? I have been exceptionally proud to be an SVS student at times, particularly when I have been successful. But during low points, I often consider that if I had stayed in public school, things would have been better. I'm aware of other students who have been successful in life that deeply regret having been sent there, and feel that they missed out a lot in life as a result. I used to be shocked by this, but now I understand the sentiment. Anything else to add? I would very much like for somebody to investigate the mortality rates of Sudbury Valley type schools, as well as other unschooling school students. When I was at Sudbury Valley School, there were around 130 students total, aged between 5 to 15. There were only around 30 to 35 students that were a year or two older or a year or two younger than me, which I considered to be around my age at the time. Out of the roughly 35 students in that age group, somewhere around a dozen of them are now dead. Many of the deaths are from overdoses, several suicides, and at least 2 that I know of were murdered. One by police and the other, I believe, went unsolved. If I recall correctly, the news said her body was found in or behind a dumpster. This is a frightening and sickeningly high percentage of people from any demographic to lose their lives so young. Despite this, I have never seen the matter addressed anywhere. Perhaps it is a random fluke, but given the circumstances that I know of, I do not really think this is the case. So, to answer your last question, I checked, and I don't think anybody has investigated the mortality rate of Sudbury Valley School students. So if there are any, scientists watching this, please do that. I will say this unschooling experience differs starkly from the last one, okay? Seems like radical unschooling, by the way. It seems like there was absolutely no parental support there at all. So this person is currently being unschooled. They are 14 years old, and they have had less than 4 years of formal education. What does unschooling mean to you? Not following a curriculum and studying in your own way. What does an average day look like when unschooling? For me, I just woke up, had breakfast, and started studying whatever the fuck my mum made me study. It sucked, honestly, because that's all I did for 8 hours. I also did textbooks, which she found in libraries and shit. It sucked because I was basically stuck indoors all day. How did you/your child learn to read? And how did you/your child learn other key life skills while unschooling? My mum taught me the basics. How to read, write, speak a little bit, the basic shit. Then, as I got older, I learned via YouTube and textbooks. Was unschooling an overall success? No. What should have been done differently if you had to do it again? I would have honestly preferred to stay in school. I hate the idea of unschooling so much, because now that I'm going to regular school, I feel like I don't fit in, and I feel weird. Wait a minute, I thought you said you were being unschooled. Anything else to add? Unschooling is also most likely the cause of my depression and anxiety. Okay, so this just sounds like homeschooling to me. I'm not saying this isn't an absolutely terrible thing that you've been to, but this isn't even relaxed homeschooling. This sounds like just traditional homeschooling to me. What is your age? 34. How much formal education have you had? Some university. Okay, so either they're going to university, or they went to university and they dropped out. They were unschooled as a child, and they are glad that they were. Now, by the way, this is going to be the last positive account of unschooling for quite a while. What does unschooling mean to you? Self-directed learning without any formal assignments or assessment activities. What does an average day look like when unschooling? When I was being unschooled, for middle and high school, my typical daily routine was riding in the car to the university. Dad was an employee, Mum was a grad student, and having deeply intellectual conversations pretty much the whole way. Spending all morning at the university library, researching whatever interested me. Eating lunch with my parents and having more intellectual conversation. Spending all afternoon at the library researching, then heading home with more intellectual conversation. I didn't realise it at the time, but those conversations were how my parents assessed my progress. And if I was missing out on something, they'd bring it up as a topic to discuss during our conversations. How did you/your child learn to read? And how did you/your child learn other key life skills while unschooling? I started unschooling at 12, so I already knew how to read. Other key life skills were learned just by my parents showing me how to do them as they became relevant. Just like how most people teach life skills to toddlers. Was unschooling an overall success? Huge success. I started as a kid with severe mental health issues who had meltdowns whenever I was given any school-type tasks, and had chronic anxiety and depression to the point where I literally forgot what happiness felt like. As I was being unschooled, my mental health steadily improved. I went to high school for grade 10, and my mental health regressed, and then I improved again when I returned to homeschooling. When I started university at age 21, I took the SAT and did really well on it. I also think I coped much better with the demands of university because I had several years of minimal demands. What should have been done differently if you had to do it again? My parents should have started it much earlier. I carry so much lasting trauma from my school experiences, and I would be so much better off if I never went to school. For those of you glad you're unschooled, what advice would you give to those considering unschooling? Unschooling doesn't mean doing nothing. It means teaching academic subjects through play and exploration, and following the child's lead. But you should be actively monitoring their learning, even if it doesn't look like you are. Anything else to add? I'm autistic and I have PDA tendencies, which I think makes me particularly well suited to unschooling and poorly suited for regular schooling. Okay, see, this is what I mean when I say that, as an outsider looking in, the accounts of unschooling seem like two polar extremes. You've got unschooling was the cause of my anxiety and depression, and then unschooling saved me from anxiety and depression. It doesn't seem like there are any baseline academic targets. It seems like the parents just, let the child have mostly freedom. But the parents, once again, definitely did speak to the child a lot, as they put it in intellectual conversations. So this is, I think, regular unschooling. Right, next one. What is your age? I'm 22 years old. How much formal education have you had? Less than middle school. Which of the following categories would you put yourself into? An adult who was unschooled as a child and wishes they weren't. An adult who was unschooled and is fiercely against it. What does unschooling mean to you? In theory, unschooling is an educational philosophy which is child-led. It does not use a fixed curriculum, it adapts to the child's interests. In essence, children are provided with the tools and resources and learning experiences that are tailored to their interests. Disturbingly, in unschooling radical form, the children are not taught anything. This is built on the idea that children will teach themselves. However, this notion is in conflict with the conventional understanding of developmental psychology. Unschooling to me is a flawed educational philosophy. On the surface, it seems amazing. Children are able to explore their interests. However, in execution it's poor. Children need structure and routine. Unfortunately, lack of structure and routine in a child's life leads to dysregulation. Having a child teach themselves is developmentally inappropriate. Children lack the ability to effectively plan into the future. They are most concerned with following the path of least resistance. In other words, doing what is easiest or most fun. It's cruel and unfair to put the burden of education onto children. Educational neglect refers to the failure to provide your children with adequate education. This includes failure to treat learning or neurodevelopmental disorders, failure to enroll in compulsory schooling, or not providing an adequate home education curriculum. Refusing to teach your children anything, and instead leaving them to their own devices, is not unschooling. It's educational neglect. Unfortunately, educational neglect is an under-researched phenomenon. Therefore, we do not fully understand the extent of the consequences it has on the person's life. Furthermore, it often blends together with other forms of neglect, making it hard to identify. To me, unschooling is a questionable educational philosophy. Moreover, it's poorly implemented by many unschooled parents. Oftentimes, it's no more than a trendy label for educational neglect. What does an average day look like when unschooling? Unschooling for me involved desperately trying to find free resources to educate myself while being berated for my intelligence constantly. In actuality, I was educationally neglected. However, my parents co-opted the term unschooling. I begged and begged to be enrolled in public high school. Sadly, my wish never came true. Regardless of the flaws of the public education system, it's infinitely better than being forced to use internet to try to teach yourself because your parents refuse to take responsibility for your education. Needless to say, this is a burden that should not be placed upon a child. How did you/your child learn to read? And how did you/your child learn other key life skills while unschooling? Embarrassingly, I'm infinitely behind my peers in terms of life skills. In many ways, I'm not free. A person ignorant how society functions is not free. Again, I was deprived of an education during my so-called unschooling experience. Unfortunately, I am behind on many academic life skills due to my horrendous experience. I learned to read using phonics, a method of learning to read where someone is taught how to decode words. However, my parents had no involvement. I was taught this method in public school. I'm grateful to read. Reading is knowledge and knowledge is power. An illiterate person is not free. Contrary to common belief, reading is not natural, unlike language which is acquired from the environment. Therefore, it's unrealistic to expect a child to teach themselves how to read. Was unschooling an overall success? Unschooling was disastrous for me. I'm behind academically and socially compared to my peers. Isolation in childhood greatly impacts their development. Not to mention, recovering from educational neglect is no easy feat. Essentially, I'm climbing mountains to reach the level my peers are at. Surprisingly, I built upon the skills I learned through public education. Surely this baseline level of knowledge helped me from becoming further behind. Needless to say, without that experience with public education, I would be even more behind. Clearly, my parents did not place enough emphasis on educating me. Evidently, education is not the responsibility of a child. Expecting children are going to teach themselves is setting them up for failure. Of course, schooling involves discipline from the child. What should have been done differently if you have to do it again? I needed actual resources, structure and discipline. It's unfair I had to fend for myself educationally. Children benefit from routine and structure. It's grossly irresponsible to not provide children with the structure they thrive on. For those of you glad you're unschooled, what advice would you give to those considering unschooling? Unschooling is a fad. I cannot in good faith recommend it to anyone. My advice is avoiding unschooling unless you're interested in structuring a curriculum around your child's interests. Don't listen to the children will educate themselves crackpots. They're bluffing. Anything else to add? To understand the effects of unschooling, do not ask unschooling parents. The voices of alumni speak louder than unschool parents. Don't get information on unschooling from an inherently biased source. Unschooling parents are prone to having confirmation bias as educational philosophy works. After all, it's hard to get critical insight from someone who is so passionate about unschooling. Use your platform to give voice to unschooling alumni. Their voices are often overshadowed by the loud advocates for unschooling. This person appears to have experienced radical unschooling simply because of the fact that it was them sitting on their computer looking for the resources themselves, seemingly absolutely no parental support whatsoever. Therefore, I think I'm going to have to categorise this as radical unschooling. What is your age? 21. How much formal education have you had? Attended public elementary school. Which of the following categories would you put yourself into? An adult who was unschooled as a child and wished that they weren't. What does unschooling mean to you? Unschooling has deluded into a fancy word that is covering educational neglect. It's educational neglect repackaged with a pretty bow, often divorced from its original meaning. What does an average day look like when unschooling? Unstructured, isolated, left to my own devices, etc. I was educationally neglected. Parents took zero involvement in my education. Now I'm reaping the consequences. How did you/your child learn to read? And how did you/your child learn other key life skills while unschooling? I learned to read using the phonics method in public school. Evidently, my math skills are lacking. Unfortunately, I was unable to teach myself maths using free resources. I noticed some unschooling parents refusing to teach their children with proven methods like phonics. Of course, radical unschooling a child is free from public school. However, they're enslaved in every other regard. Not surprisingly, there is a connection between illiteracy and incarceration. Of course, refusing to teach your child to read is insulting. Throughout history, illiteracy was often used as a tool to control. Reading is a major source of human information. Knowledge is power and much of it comes from written text. No, your child isn't going to teach themselves to read. Reading is not natural, it needs direct instruction. Was unschooling an overall success? With certainty, I can say that unschooling was unsuccessful for me. Frankly, no capable adult should be forced into a situation where they are forced to get a high school education. Evidently, many opportunities I missed out on, not to mention, it's taken immense effort for me to open new doors. Moreover, I'm struggling to adapt to society. Undoubtedly, unschooling is a mistake. Its negative impacts on my life are far-reaching. Surely, fighting to get a basic education, despite otherwise being capable, is disheartening. What should have been done differently if you had to do it again? Evidently, I do not agree with the unschooling philosophy. Hypothetically speaking, if I had to unschool my future child, here's how I would approach. Arithmetic. Reading and writing are non-negotiable. My child would receive direct instruction daily on those subjects from me. Establish a routine. Routine is essential to the emotional regulation of a child. A free-range childhood is not supporting the healthy development of the child. Moreover, an inconsistent routine can easily throw a child off. Routine provides the child with structure and familiarity. In other words, they understand what is coming. Surprises are kept to a minimum. Boundaries and expectations. Parents are responsible for managing their child's life. Frankly, lacking clear boundaries and expectations for your child is problematic. It's essential to set expectations for your child's learning. Avoid unlimited playtime. Perhaps I would have a learning room in my house. This room will function as a space for my child to get into the mindset of learning. Children aren't supposed to teach themselves. It's important to have an active role in their education, learning objectives, etc. Avoid being passive in your child's education. Unschooling isn't for you if you aren't ready to plan, keep track of your child's learning process, and actively teach them. Adapting curriculum to your child's interests is not the same as leaving your child to fend for themselves educationally. Certainly, leaving children with their own devices is unacceptable. Unschooling shouldn't lack curriculum, it should simply adapt to the child's preferences. This does not mean your child can choose not to read or learn arithmetic. Ideally, it means finding ways to incorporate your child's interests. For example, maybe your child watched a nature documentary and now they are into learning about plants and animals. As an unschooled parent, your job is to shape the curriculum around their interests. Keeping this in mind, an unschooled parent with a child interested in biology may encourage their child to keep reading and writing by giving them reading passages on plants and animals to answer questions on. Perhaps they may teach their child the structure of a 5-paragraph essay. and the basics of internet or library research. Then their child can write an essay on, let's say, the metamorphosis of a butterfly. Or this can simply look like finding your child biology worksheets and giving them lessons. Or perhaps something more exciting like owl pellets to dissect. Then a quick write-up on what they learned. Deliberately expose your child to a variety of topics. Obviously, without knowing of something's existence, they cannot express interest in it. Only once your child has a general understanding of science, history, etc., they can develop a specific interest. Remember, focusing on your child's interest shouldn't mean neglecting the other subjects. It simply means, when possible, incorporate your child's interest. Even parents who public school their children are responsible for their child's education. All parents incorporate learning experiences into their child's life. Clearly, the belief that it will come naturally to your child when they're ready is nonsense. Of course, children learn to read at different paces. However, they do not teach themselves. No reason your 5-year-old child isn't ready to learn to read. In essence, my unschooling would incorporate some of the philosophy of unschooling, with structure akin to traditional homeschooling. For those of you glad you're unschooled, what advice would you give to those considering unschooling? Unfortunately, I cannot in good faith recommend unschooling. Avoid joining online communities promoting this educational philosophy. Clearly, unschooling communities are biased. Moreover, information that puts unschooling in a bad light is often suppressed. In addition, parents claiming their unschooling is successful should be taken with skepticism. When someone is neck deep in a philosophy, it's challenging for them to see the flaws. Not to mention, it's painful to admit the choice made for your child's education is hurting them. Certainly, public school is flawed. Evidently, children fall under the cracks, especially children who are neurodivergent or have learning disabilities. Moreover, teachers are often underpaid. However, even the worst public school education is infinitely better than the worst of unschooling. The saying, if it's too good to be true, then it's probably bullshit, rings true in the context of education. On the surface, unschooling is appealing. After all, humans are attracted to novel ideas. Don't confuse an educational philosophy being unique for its quality. Remember, research opportunities for your child. In some districts, homeschooling requires accredited courses to graduate. It's oftentimes challenging to move on to post-secondary education without transcripts. Of course, self-taught professionals exist. However, the likelihood of your child becoming the next self-taught entrepreneur is slim. In other words, do your research and make sure you're not stifling your child's future. Regardless of how you feel towards public education or structured homeschooling, they are essential to your child's ability to participate in society. Again, I cannot recommend unschooling. With that said, there is no reason you cannot incorporate the unschooling philosophy into your child's life. Parents should absolutely encourage their children to explore passions and interests. Anything else to add? Avoid underestimating the strength of the struggling unschooled alumni. Although we are silent, a revolution is in the works. We cannot change what happened to us. However, our experience provides valuable insights. Ultimately, this can lead to tighter regulations in unschooling. We are resilient people, often struggling to adapt to a society we were under-socialized to be a part of. This account seems like radical unschooling because, once again, there was absolutely no parental intervention there. What is your age? 18. How much formal education have you had? Primary. Which of the following categories would you put yourself into? An adult who was unschooled as a child and wished they weren't. What does unschool mean to you? It's hard to pinpoint a precise meaning of unschooling. It's evolved to be barely recognisable to Holt's original vision. Misconceptions arose within the unschooled community itself. Essentially, unschooling has morphed into something resembling educational neglect. To me, unschooling is something I resent. It's changed my life for the worse. It's something misinformed parents are attracted to. What does an average day look like when unschooling? Using my smartphone all day binging TikTok. To be honest, I didn't get much learning done. After all, I was 100% expected to teach myself. It's no surprise, children aren't exactly known for self-discipline and planning for the future. How did you/your child learn to read? And how did you/your child learn other key life skills while unschooling? I learned to read in preschool, learning the formation of letters, then how they sound. It's no surprise, I'm super behind my peers. I was never given a fair opportunity to thrive. I'm ignorant in many subjects. Needless to say, I don't exactly perform at grade level. After all, I'm behind academically. Sure, I can catch up, but not without adequate support. I used what I did learn from public school to navigate the internet. I would try to teach myself from academic piracy sites like Anna's Archive, Library Genesis or Sci-Hub, or free college lectures from MIT OpenCourseWare. The lack of expectations made me unmotivated. It was super hard and the results are pitiful. Was unschooled an overall success? Absolutely not. Not being taught anything through homeschool has proven to be detrimental to me. What should have been done differently if you had to do it again? More structure, parents involved in education, actual expectations, a curriculum, even one adapted to my interests, opportunities for learning beyond what I found for free on the internet. Let's be real, I'd be better off going to a public high school. For those of you glad you're unschooled, what advice would you give to those considering unschooling? It's blank because they weren't glad they were homeschooled. Anything else to add? The Coalition for Responsible Homeschooling are angels. Unschooling has a dark side to it, not discussed enough. We need more regulations. It's unacceptable parents get away with teaching their children nothing. Shout out to r/homeschool recovery. Your voices have not gone unheard. I was unschooled, and I seek to destroy it. So this person just seems to be radical unschooling. Once again, no parental help. Next one. What is your age? 19. How much formal education have you had? Year 7. Which of the following categories would you put yourself into? An adult who was unschooled as a child and wishes they weren't. What does unschooling mean to you? I hate unschooling. I would have killed to be homeschooled traditionally or attend secondary school in person. It's just an excuse not to teach your child anything. In theory, it's amazing. Learn whatever you want, but it's an educational philosophy that's taken over by grossly misinformed parents. What does an average day look like when unschooling? Wake up, use internet, struggle to teach self, just chat online with strangers instead, no actual lessons, no expectations, no guidance. How did you/your child learn to read? And how did you/your child learn other key life skills while unschooling? By learning letter formation through tracing and writing again and again, then learning how each of their sounds. I was taught how to decode words. After I understood how the letters sound together, I sided with the easy level readers. Reading was mandatory. Every day reading and writing practice at primary school. Was unschooling an overall success? Absolutely not. It destroyed me academically. I'm fighting to catch up with my peers. You can't call completely denying a kid of a well-rounded education successful. What should have been done differently if you had to do it again? A more well-rounded curriculum. Actual guidance from parents. Expectations for learning. Actually being taught by a teacher or parent. More structure. More rules. Not being allowed to play video games and use phone all day. For those of you glad you're unschooled, what advice would you give to those considering unschooling? Left blank, because, well, obviously. Anything else to add? Anti-unschooling advocacy needs more eyes on it. Children don't deserve to be uneducated because idealistic parents wanted to try a unique educational philosophy. Okay, this is radical unschooling. Moving on. What is your age? 22. How much formal education have you had? None. Which of the following categories would you put yourself into? An adult who was unschooled as a child and wishes they weren't. What does unschooling mean to you? Having no form of school at home or otherwise. What does an average day look like when unschooling? Being left alone. How did you/your child learn to read? And how did you/your child learn other key life skills while unschooling? Books? No. Was unschooling an overall success? No. What should have been done differently if you had to do it again? Everything. For those of you glad you're unschooled, what advice would you give to those considering unschooling? Not answered. Anything else to add? Unschooling should be outlawed. Okay, this isn't very detailed, so I'm not sure. However, it seems like radical unschooling to me. Now, this is actually the only account we've had from somebody who hasn't experienced unschooling themselves. What is your age? 35. How much formal education have you had? Master's degree. Which of the following categories would you put yourself into? Anyone else who has personal experiences of unschooling? Okay, so this person doesn't specify what their personal experiences are, by the way. Maybe their cousin or their brother was unschooled. Who knows? What does unschooling mean to you? Neglect. What does an average day look like when unschooling? Anarchy. How did you/your child learn to read? And how did you/your child learn other key life skills while unschooling? They don't. Was unschooling an overall success? Never. What should have been done differently if you had to do it again? It should be illegal. For those of you glad you're unschooled, okay, left blank. Anything else to add? No. Okay, so this account seems like radical unschooling. With so little detail for this one, I'm hesitant to put it anywhere. However, I'm going to put radical unschooling because that's what it seems like. Okay, on to the next one now. Trigger warning for this one. This one's going to include some references to misogyny. It's not that detailed of a description of misogyny, it's literally only references to misogyny. However, it's just enough that I feel the need to put a trigger warning in there. What is your age? 17. How much formal education have you had? None. Which of the following categories would you put yourself into? A child who is being unschooled and wishes they weren't. What does unschool mean to you? My mum teaches me cooking and cleaning. What does an average day look like when unschooling? I help my mum with my brothers and sisters and clean and cook. How did you/your child learn to read? And how did you/your child learn other key life skills while unschooling? My brother taught me and gave me a phone to hide when he left last year. I help my mum, but I'm tired and want to go to school. Mum says next birthday I get married and have my own babies and husband and house to cook and clean. That's what us women are here for. To love and support husbands under God's umbrella. Was unschooling an overall success? I'm learning more with my phone and sad there's people who go to school but I didn't. What should have been done differently if you had to do it again? I wish I learned about school before and went. For those of you glad you unschooled, left blank. Anything else to add? When I talk about my life, people don't care and say my mum and dad neglected me and that it doesn't count. It makes me feel sad. Some don't care. I should hide or not say anything because it works for everyone else. Okay, so I'm going to attempt to put this somewhere on the spectrum without sounding like one of the people from this anything else to add section. The problem is I'm very hesitant to place this anywhere because it just doesn't seem like education in any way. And by the way, I absolutely do not think you should hide and not say anything. I think if you want to talk about this, then talk about it as much as you want. This doesn't seem like radical unschooling because it's a child that doesn't seem to have been expected to teach themselves anything, but I also hesitate to put it in unschool neither because it doesn't seem like the parent helped the child learn much apart from cooking and cleaning. This doesn't seem like a child-led education experience, and it's not homeschooling either because the parents definitely didn't teach the children anything school-related. I think I have to put this in relaxed unschooling simply because the parents taught the child a small amount, but not that much. But I'm putting this in relaxed homeschooling, not because I think it deserves to go, but because I have to put it somewhere. Okay, next one. What is your age? 54. How much formal education have you had? University. And this person, interestingly, is a parent who unschooled their now grown-up child, and is glad they did. This is the first parent account, by the way. What does unschool mean to you? Empowering the learner to learn whatever they desire. What does an average day look like when unschooling? Like a summer Saturday. How did you/your child learn to read? And how did you/your child learn other key life skills while unschooling? They learn to read as all kids do, by simply letting their brain mature. They learn life skills by living life. Was unschooling an overall success? Yes. All 5 kids entered professional degree programs in engineering, nursing, teaching, science, and a master's in English. 4 of 5 have graduated. What should have been done differently if you had to do it again? We pulled our oldest out of school at age 7. We should have done it sooner. For those of you going to unschooled, what advice would you give to those considering unschooling? Everyone unschools for the first 5 years. We just kept going. Anything else to add? I've written a best-selling book called Unschooled University. Check it out. So this is one of these unschooled parents I've been warned about in previous accounts. And this person does seem to buy into the idea that children learn to read naturally, which other accounts have previously decried. So I looked her book up, and I'm not going to buy it, but it does have an 8-page preview on Google Books. As it turns out, if you read pages 12 and 13 off her book, I think it will become pretty clear that this is at least good enough to put in regular unschooling. Okay, so now we're moving on to the core answers. Here's the first one. I was only partially unschooled. Part of my education consisted of going to the gym, music, and later, art classes with my age peers from kindergarten through 4th grade, and Spanish, chemistry, and computer programming classes with the high school kids from the time I was 8 to the time I was 10. I would have continued with this arrangement, except that it was impossible to convince the physics teacher to let me into his class. I had already been begging my parents for 3 years to let me go to college, and this physics teacher was the last straw. My parents finally made a deal with me that if they didn't have to pay a penny for my college, I would be allowed to go. I took the SAT and ACT and got good enough scores to get admitted to the Ohio Dominican University, and was able to get it paid for via the PSEO program. I began attending ODU at the age of 11 and graduated at the age of 16 with degrees in chemistry and biology. I dropped out of high school at that point, but later I had to go back and get my GED as a 19-year-old in order to fill out some paperwork for graduate school. Rewinding to my school-age time, I spent a great deal of my time at the library, playing outside, working on projects, doing chores, using the computer, designing airplanes, which necessitated all the knowledge I would have learned if I went to school for aeronautical engineering, spending time with a couple of business owners and a physical therapist, and a dentist. Basically, anyone who would take me under his wing and be a role model for me. I turned down a chance to go to Juilliard and become a concert pianist in order to build model airplanes in the basement of a man who would later become the best in the world in one particular niche of model aviation. He was better than a grandfather to me. I have immense love and respect for him. Here's an example of a plane he scratch-built and flew. I learned more about the real world spending weekends in a basement, working on airplanes with Mike Barbie and John Boyko than I ever did in school. I learned more about running a business and making deals, more about craftsmanship and doing a good job, more about practical electronics, the stuff that you can't learn by reading a book, more about healthy competition, and more about how to have real, healthy adult interactions, more about arguing and debate, more about every single school subject than I ever would have learned in school on Saturday and Sunday afternoons with Mike and John. John has cerebral palsy and is simultaneously one of the least handicapped men I've ever met. He and I got off to a rough start, but even though I haven't seen him in years, I can say he's one of my closest friends. John and I would debate for hours, and Mike would listen and laugh. Nothing hurts more than doing nothing. Hurts more than doing nothing. Hurts more than doing nothing. Get out there! The only disability in life is a bad attitude. Here is a picture of Mike and John. I worked at a grocery store at age 14, opened a retirement account, and very shortly after, I then got into tutoring, entered the educational field, and never looked back. My own father was instrumental in helping me get educated. Insofar as enabling and encouraging learning goes, he was better than I could have ever hoped or asked for, and far better than I deserve. Someday, I'm going to write a book about him. I can't even begin to do him justice in a core answer. Here's a picture of Dad/Grandpa exchanging glances with my son. They have an understanding. My mother was always there in my younger years. My mum is amazing in terms of intuiting what a child needs on a developmentally appropriate level and giving it. She has dealt with children with IQ 80 to 100, and everywhere in between. She manages to do what is right for each and every one of them, both as a teacher and as a parent. My experiences so far were very different than those of my brother. Both of us turned out okay, at least so far. That fatso in the beard is me. Fortunately, I've lost weight since then. Either way, my unschooling was predominantly centred around aviation, and I still wound up pretty well rounded. I started with what interested me and then broadened my horizons over the years as life necessitated it. My brother started off by trying way more things than I did, and ultimately settled on doing things his way, a bit more slowly than I, but he still managed to finish every single course his online high school offered by the time he was either 16 or 17. So they paid for him to complete his compulsory high school attendance by taking classes at the local community college. My parents gave up a lot of things that could be considered valuable, including employment and stock options that could have increased their net worth considerably. And no, I won't say how much in a core answer. In order to maintain a healthy family environment halfway between the country and the city, with one parent at home and one at work, they had the humility to point me to the people who could mentor me in things I was interested in. And they had the wisdom to teach me from a young age that you are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. So make good choices about who you hang out with. Self-directing my own learning was the most natural thing in the world, but I wouldn't have been able to do it anywhere near as quickly or properly without guidance and character development, and lots of reading materials from the beginning. 10 out of 10 would recommend. My wife and I are homeschooling/unschooling our own children. We would rather live under a tree than send them to school. So this one seems like relaxed homeschooling to me, in my opinion. My sister and I grew up in a mix of unschooling and slightly more mainstream homeschooling. One of the things that I really loved was it fed my hunger as a child. As a kid, I don't want to be strapped to the kitchen table for 8 hours. I want to go outside, I want to run around, I want to watch movies, I want to read books, I want to play with my friends. Unschooling allowed me to do that. For example, there was a pond behind our house which my mum used as a stepping stone into science, biology, using microscopes for the first time. There was a rock bed in the front yard, and we kept bringing rocks in to make our own mini collections. As an English exercise, she had my sister and I write a story about where the rocks came from with a first-person perspective. The flexibility of unschooling allows you to really tailor to the hunger and curiosity of children. For instance, I was really into cat breeds at the time, and through my love of the Scottish fold cats, I started learning about genetics when I was only 12. I finished all of my biology and sciences required to graduate by the end of my freshman year in high school. There will be subjects you have to study even if you aren't interested in them, so we still use books and computer programming for some of the less fascinating subjects, but the great thing was that unschooling allowed me to excel and press and learn in the areas that I wanted to, and that curiosity and learning hunger has served me well through to this day. I think the best part about unschooling is that instead of punishing kids for their curiosity, you get the chance to feed it and give them lots of brain food that will show them that learning is enjoyable, and they have the ability to learn whatever they want, if they put their mind to it. This is especially great for kids who are hyperactive, because instead of constantly having to tell them to sit here and sit still and read this and sit back down and stay in here, etc., you can have them focus for a shorter amount of time on actual textbooks, for the less interesting topics, but then you can let them be free and let them put that energy into what they are interested in learning. If you can instill passion into learning, they will have the key to the universe. We did so many things with unschooling. Pond science, genetic, raising all sorts of animals, learning about plants, my first ventures into poetry, all sorts of field trips to museums, farms, science centres, art classes through polymer, clay, history trips to the Greenfield village, etc. My mum would use car time for all sorts of great literature on tape that we listened to. She would rent videos on our topics, get us books, and depending on the topic, activity kits for us. There was always new material and different mediums coming in and out of our house. It gave me lots of ways to learn information. If you can add adventure and tactile examples to the stuff you're working on, it stops being boring text and turns into life stuff. That's actually pretty cool. Plus, being at home allows more flexibility to go places and do things. The only downside is that it has the potential to not be so great for kids who really need routine and schedules to feel secure and anchored, like my sister, since it's a very spontaneous, fluid and flexible way of educating your kids. Unschooling worked pretty well for her, but eventually went back to public school and finished out there. So you have to pay attention to that. Other than that, in a word, it was amazing for my mind, and it rocked. Okay, this seems to be relaxed homeschooling in my opinion. Like I said, things that you definitely have to know, which implies that there was some baseline academic expectations, and so I'm going to put this at relaxed homeschooling. What is the definition of unschooling? Exactly how involved can parents be before it becomes homeschooling? Parents can have a lot of influence without issuing direct orders, for example, by shaping the learning environment, bringing interesting resources to the child's attention, teaching, by example, the value of learning, etc. These things are important and can make a big difference. I would advise anyone considering unschooling to tread carefully. Done wrong, unschooling or homeschooling, or any type of schooling for that matter, can be detrimental. I went to public school from kindergarten to 3rd grade. I convinced my parents to let me drop out by staging a protest in our living room. About 10 years later, I did the GED test and started taking classes at a community college. Fast forward again, and I'm currently in a PhD program. My path is certainly not typical, but I'm not sure there was any such thing as a typical unschooler. My parents both worked full-time. Both had high school diplomas as their highest level of education. None of us had heard the term unschooling. We all thought I was homeschooling, or at least they did. While they were away at work, I mostly played video games and chatted online. They didn't know because I lied to them and was clever enough to get away with it. I told them Age of Empires was teaching me ancient history. I learned basic programming because a friend in a chat room got me interested. I didn't learn most of the things I was supposed to learn during that time. As a result, when it came to start college, I was behind and had to take some remedial classes in community college. I don't mind that I graduated a year or so later, but it could be worse for other kids. I am probably more curious and driven to learn than on average. That was the main reason I wanted to homeschool, and unschooling may be the reason I am still that way. I have some unusual life experiences, or lack thereof, from my years of being left to my own devices. I didn't spend as much time around people of my own age. I've always befriended people of all ages. I guess homeschoolers have this in common, that their parents might socialise them, a transitive verb, with groups of other homeschoolers of the same age. I rode my bike around a lot while waiting for a friend to get out of school so we could play video games. I walked to the movie theatre and watched movies. I hung out with my older cousin and his friends and practiced martial arts in the park with them. I pursued my interests obsessively until something else got my attention. I played an MMORPG almost constantly for close to a year. I became involved in a cult-like fundamentalist church and was planning to go to Bible school. Then I decided I was actually an atheist. To generalise from my own experiences, just imagine the kind of stuff that kids, teenagers, get into when they're left alone for a while. Unschooled kids will probably just do that unless their parents are really in touch with their interests and providing them excellent learning material and probably fame and quality stuff, not the unreadable garbage that fills most textbooks. As for my own outcome, maybe there are intangible/unquantifiable benefits that make up for the lost time. For example, 8 and counting years in university haven't managed to beat the curiosity out of me yet. And the lost time hasn't hurt me very much, apparently, since I'm in a fairly competitive school pursuing a PhD in a fairly challenging subject. That's roughly what it was like for me as an unschooler with almost no parental guidance at all. I guess unschoolers will be a pretty heterogeneous group despite their relatively small size. That depends on the individual family. Technically, I'm no longer a homeschooler as I got my HISET, which stands for High School Equivalency Test, and is very similar to the GED this past summer. But because I'm 17 and continuing my education outside of the public school system, I still consider myself a homeschooler, and refer to myself as such if asked about my education. I first left the school system when I was 12. My first year of homeschooling was probably the most traditional. I was given a standard textbooks by my parents in maths. I was expected to do daily reading and write a report, about 1 page single-spaced, on any book that I finished. My dad would also assign me the occasional project like watch Robert Reich Inequality for All and write about it or read a book about 9/11. The second project was assigned on 9/11. Towards the end of that year of homeschooling, these assignments got less frequent. I think my parents realised more that when allowed to follow their ambitions and given support from adults, kids naturally learn. My parents used to take me to the library with books all the time, and I'd pick out books on science or mathematics. The first year of homeschooling also featured much extracurricular activity. I took a road trip with my dad and my older sister, who started homeschooling about a year before me, to the Red River Gorge in Kentucky, where we spent several days rock climbing. I got my junior scuba certification and took a 3-day dive trip to Key Largo, Florida. I was on a competitive rock climbing team that practiced 9 hours a week and went to many competitions. Time was also filled playing baseball, going on hikes, those sorts of things. After a year of independent homeschooling, I joined a homeschooling resource centre. There I was able to take classes and attend one-on-one tutoring sessions on subjects that interested me. Attendance was optional. Classwork was optional. There were no grades, tests, or homework. You couldn't get in trouble for wearing a hat or being late to something. That centre truly put the student in control of their schedule. It was a challenge by choice approach to education. This is a form of homeschooling referred to as unschooling, and it's what I've been practicing since I was 13. My experience specifically with unschooling has been amazing, and the best model of education for me. I've been able to study psychology, forensics, anatomy, biology, mathematics, physics, writing, chemistry, politics, and the criminal justice system, and probably some I'm forgetting. My methods for studying the above have been classes/tutorials at the Homeschooling Resource Centre, classes at community college, I'm currently in my last semester for associates, reading, and the internet. The 3 general approaches I've seen to homeschooling are replicating a school curriculum from home, creating an individual curriculum from home, and 3, unschooling. My first year of homeschooling was a combination of 1 and 3. I don't have any experience with 2. This tends to be practiced by parents who want their kids to have a lot of knowledge in a specific area not taught by traditional schooling. This might be a trade or family business. though is often due to a family being incredibly religious. If you are curious, I wrote more about my path from public school to homeschooling to unschooling to college here. Orion Cohen's answer to how do parents rationalise homeschooling. If anyone has more questions about my education path or homeschooling in general, feel free to ask in the comments or message me. Okay, so now we're moving on to the final two, the Reddit ones, the ones I've been building up to and saying these are the most anti-unschooling accounts in the entire video. I will say there is some discussion of suicide in both of these, so if you want to skip to this timestamp, that'll be fine. So I just found this subreddit and I wanted to ask this. Brief story, I'm 35 now, but I was unschooled from age 6 to 18. Someone asked on Quora for a detailed rebuttal of unschooling, and here's what I posted based on my experience. Most adults don't have ideas of what to learn or what they want to do, let alone children. Expecting children to direct their own education this way is idealistic at best, neglectful at worst. I can't tell you how many times I was berated and yelled at for not having enough interests, and being blamed for my lack of an education. Unschooling puts the blame on the child, and allows neglectful parents to flourish. If you're uneducated, it's your fault, since you, as an uneducated child, are in charge of your education. Some parents, mine included, use unschool as a way to let their children run free and absolve themselves of any guilt for developmental delays, since the child is in charge. Oh, he can't read? That's okay, he'll learn when he feels like it. Most unschoolers treat their way of life as a cult. If you in any way support public school, or speak out against unschooling, you are ostracised and given lots of canned information, propaganda, about how wrong-headed you are. The founders of unschooling are quoted like scripture, and you will be re-educated in the ways of unschooling. You were also told unschooling will take over the world, since public schools are crumbling and falling. You are told your life is the best it can be, and non-unschooled children are miserable. You are told public schools are no better than prisons, and are criminally overfunded. But due to evil and corruption, the money is stolen away and not used on students. You are told from a young age that you are better, smarter and more capable than any of the public school kids, creating an unreasonable view of yourself as an us versus them mentality. More cult stuff. It did not work for me. I can't speak for everybody, but I had to start in community college at age 16 and take almost every single remedial course because I had essentially the education of a second grader. Example, I didn't know the US had a civil war until I was 19, and I couldn't carry or borrow or even understand what those things meant when I first enrolled. It took me a total of 12 years to obtain a bachelor's degree. And my question is, was my experience based on bad parenting, or was it this way for anyone else? I know unschooling is a niche within a niche, but still, anyone else? So this is definitely radical unschooling. It seems like the parents were not helping the child in any way and just expecting them to teach themselves, so. And the second account is a reply to that account. It's this one. Yeah, what you're describing is exactly what my mother had me do from 12 to 18. And before then, from 10 to 12, we basically did it anyway, but she didn't have a name and a philosophy behind it to back her up. We only moved to states with lax homeschooling laws. We did just enough to pass any end-of-year exam, usually by showing off artistic skills and her trying to label us as prodigies. I had to beg for any educational materials, and I was forbidden from getting them if I tested above grade level because I didn't need it, etc. I basically sat all day in my room, doing one math lesson from the book she agreed to buy me, and if I got an answer wrong and she couldn't figure out why, it meant the textbook was wrong and I should just assume I was right. Doing a logic exercise from a logic workbook she let me get, and then playing guitar, drawing, listening obsessively to albums she let me listen to, reading Tolkien, and classic lit to pretend I was anywhere else, and writing lyrics. She'd also get me SAT or GED prep exam books, because that'll teach you everything, when it was just shallow highlights and taking test hacks. But then wouldn't let me actually take those tests. Then at night, we'd all watch the news or sitcoms or rewatch the same movies over and over, and if I watched a classic film, that counted as school. If I baked a box cake mix, that counted as math, etc. The only friend I met online, used to tell me what reading she was assigned in her English class at college, and I read it along with her and then talk about her lectures/essays over the phone, to desperately pretend I was actually getting to learn. Any question of it whatsoever was very much treated like speaking out against a cult. You were a sheep, you were a cog, you were part of society's downfall, you were being trained to be a factory worker, which is so offensive to anyone that does work. You were lazy, you were wicked, you couldn't understand it, you weren't progressive enough, ha! Etc. She did this well enough that she had one state we lived in actually ask her to take a new position they wanted to create for her, where she'd basically be the state's expert on homeschooling and help all the parents do it. She turned it down, I think because she realised how neglectful and uninvolved she would come out. She literally spent all day doing graphic design work and making websites, reading scare stories about homeschoolers who got arrested or had their kids taken away, so she'd have fuel to prove her paranoia right, and bragging on homeschooling message boards about how great she was doing. And because I was so conditioned to be well behaved from the abuse, and because I was naturally gifted at a few arts and a good reader, she was able to parade me around like a shining example of how well unschooling worked. Meanwhile, I constantly regret not getting to study basically any science or math, or anything remotely sophisticated, like a middle school level, and I literally tried to kill myself multiple times at 17, so a real good job there. Okay, so this one's a bit more difficult. It's definitely either radical or regular unschooling. However, I will say that regular unschooling means you do have to help the child in an actually meaningful and good way. This child did get some help, but it was so little help and so reluctant help. In my opinion, I'm going to class this as radical unschooling. You just listened to 46 minutes of unschoolers writing about their unschooling experience. 2 days ago, as of writing this, I sat down and listened back to those same 46 minutes of audio that you just did, and I took notes. And based on those notes, I'm now going to give a conclusion about how to do unschooling correctly. One clear trend I think you can see is the difference between radical and regular unschooling. We did not get a single failed example of regular unschooling. Meanwhile, for radical unschooling, we got one lukewarm account that acknowledged that it could have gone horribly. And I'm happy for this person, don't get me wrong, but based on this, I really don't recommend radical unschooling. So now that we have an overview, let's go into the details of the difference between the two forms of unschooling. Many of the negative, radical unschooling accounts described neglect. They said that their parents refused to help them with their education at all, refused to provide any resources for them, and forced them to find the resources themselves. But if you look at the positive accounts, you don't see any of that. Instead, the adults who were unschooled as a child described spending hours a day with their parents on their education. The child decided what they wanted to learn, and the parents helped them learn it. The parents provided lots of resources for the child to learn from. Account number 4 was taken to a university library every day to read books on what they were interested in, and account 16 went to a homeschooling resources centre, which I'm now just learning is something that exists. The pattern I see here is that all the failed accounts almost always leave the child to find the resources and educate themselves. The successful unschooling accounts almost always spend time with the child to help them learn about what they want to learn about, and provide them with so many resources to educate themselves with. So in conclusion, if you want to unschool successfully, don't just expect your child to educate themselves. When they say they want to learn something, find them books about that thing and talk to them about it. Because as much as your child may love learning, they cannot do it without you. If you don't help your child, it will ruin their life. Of course, if you don't feel like unschooling, many accounts of failed unschoolers recommend a curriculum around your child's interests, which sounds to me a lot like relaxed homeschooling. So you could do that as well. So now that we know how to unschool properly, I have another question. Should it be illegal? This question may surprise you, as I just explained my opinion that unschooling can be done right, but I can't avoid the fact that many of the negative accounts said unschooling should be illegal. If we cite the principle of utilitarianism, i.e. the idea that the morally correct action is the one that creates the most happiness for most people, then there is a strong case to be made for the criminalisation of unschooling. A vast majority of the accounts we looked at today were very critical of unschooling. Obviously, a much larger survey would have to be done, as I have a very small sample set here, but if this survey turns out to be representative of the whole picture, then mathematically, more happiness would be generated by banning unschooling. According to utilitarianism, unschooling should absolutely be banned. So, should we criminalise unschooling? I certainly think that radical unschooling should be banned, but I think unschooling in and of itself should be legal and regulated. Many countries around the world regulate homeschooling, so this isn't really a new idea of mine. Loads of things get regulated by the government, so why shouldn't unschooling be? We could prevent bad acting parents from neglecting their child and ensure that they're helping their child the correct way, and if we find out they're educationally neglecting their child, then I guess we'll have to send them to school. Normal school. So, to sum up this entire video, here is how to unschool properly if you feel the urge to do so, and unschooling should be legal and regulated. Bye!